Thank you for joining us. This is Paul Wilson.
And Chris Emke.
And you're listening to the Diesel Performance Podcast. Chris, the team went out and had some fun last night doing some truck stuff.
Some orthodox and unorthodox truck stuff, I guess you can say. So the guys in the R&D department, they've been, it's no secret, they've been working on some Ford Raptor 3.5-liter EcoBoost engine stuff. So
a truck I've made fun of for a lot of years, and then I actually drove one. And
you look like an F-150 driver. Anyways, so EcoBoost, they make pretty decent power.
Yeah.
Impressive.
No lie.
So they took that, and they took Joe Hager, one of the guys that work over at Calibrated Power's L5P, to the drag strip to get some numbers.
Emissions-equipped sled pull truck, now drag racing.
Yeah, which,
with emissions
come on,
equipment
man. Emissions doesn't make power, so don't right? That's the theme. But what was surprising is both trucks ran consistent 1330s.
Yeah.
Hager's truck makes, arguably about 550 wheel horsepower on our dyno. The EcoBoost makes just shy of 500.
Yep.
So both of those vehicles that go, 13.3s, 13.2s at the mile an hour that they were going proves that the power's going to the ground. So home run across the board there.
Absolutely. Yeah. And those trucks, obviously much different weight, so different horsepower levels are going to get us, different times and trap speeds and things like that. But they backed up the number. So it's one of the things we always tell guys is dyno numbers is just a number on a sheet. What you want is the truck to feel a certain way. And a part of that feel a certain way is have a certain amount of power. Yeah. And the best place to back up your results from a dyno is a drag strip. Because we know what the math is based on the weight, the trap speed, and ET of the truck. Yep. We can actually figure out here's the real power it's putting down to the ground.
And both trucks are driving on the street this morning. So, again, another home run.
Yeah, so kind of boring. Yeah. Right, yeah, nothing broke. Which is a great thing for us. Hey, guys, something we don't usually do is plug a couple of our sources. And now that's because 99% of the time we have an interview on the show, and that interview pretty much is our source. Today we're doing things a little bit different. There's a lot of talk going on in the industry. There's a lot of questions we're getting over during our day jobs at Duramax Tuner Calibrated Power.
I'd say between the day jobs and the forums right now, man, things are blowing up in every forum from 12-valve, 24-valve Cummins to third-gen 5.9 Cummins to
L5P owners and flight fins, whatever the hell that group is.
And 6-liter Ford and everything in between, man.
Right.
Just the last couple of weeks has really shooken up the diesel industry in a lot of ways.
So one of the things we thought we would do is we would go get real, accurate, trusted, verified sources.
Trustful information.
Yeah, trustful. Right. Yeah. So I went to dieselhub.com, probably one of the best information sources about your diesel truck. If you want factual information about your diesel truck, go to dieselhub.com. It's really easy. They have great articles, great resources, definitions of everything, links to everything else you could ever want. If you want to learn and you're just thirsty for diesel knowledge, it's a great place to go.
And then the second website.
I went to EPA.gov.
Wow.
I know that sounds crazy, right? But a lot of people, there's a lot of hate for the EPA. There's a lot of distrust of the EPA, a lot of wild, crazy conspiracy theory accusations about the EPA. But if you actually go to EPA.gov, turns out they have a very informative site. There's a ton of resources. There's a ton of explanations. There's also a ton of definitions. And there's actual legitimate publicly filed documents that you can read. You can read a lot of details about some of the things that went on that we're going to be talking about today. And really what we're going to dive into today is, of course, emissions equipment. Emissions equipment in a big way. I think a lot of people don't understand what emissions equipment is. I don't know how many guys have asked me, can I delete my EGR but leave my DPF? or hey, I just want to get rid of the DEF. I want an emissions equipped tune, but I just want to get rid of the DEF. So I don't think a lot of people understand what emissions equipment is.
Yeah. I would say too, understanding, EPA's, statement, if you will, and their impact on the diesel industry, and more or less, how did we get to where we are right now?
Right. Yeah. What happened? What the fuck? Like I woke up today and all of a sudden there's a notice.
Yep.
Not true. Actually, this has been going on for a long time. We do want to discuss what's going on in today's climate. We're going to wrap that up near the end of the show, along with where do we go from here. Yeah. So let's dive into it, Chris. First of all, I said a lot of people don't understand what emissions equipment is. In general, if you group all of the emissions equipment together, I think you could just describe it as pollution control devices. Yeah. We're really they're watching tailpipe emissions, what comes out of the back of the vehicle, what's going into our atmosphere. They're watching carbon, NOx, other pollutants. We're actually going to define the 6 pollutants that they watch. But there's a lot of parts that make up your emissions system.
I mean, when you think about the emissions as a whole, I mean, for starters, you have the diesel particulate filter, which was introduced, I would say, second in the lineup of emissions.
Sure.
The first was, of course, the exhaust gas recirculation setup, which is the EGR.
EGR, man.
So since 2004, 2004 and a half, 2005, I know a couple of the big manufacturers started introducing EGRs on diesels. EGRs have been in gas engines for a very long time.
I want to clear up something about EGRs real quick. How many times have you heard a guy say, I don't want this EGR pumping dirty exhaust back into my engine?
Way too many times.
Like a lot, right?
A day.
This is what everybody thinks. Okay. So people, especially back in I know I always relate to the Duramaxes. So 04 and a half when the LLY came out, they're out for a few years and all of a sudden guys are like, oh, my turbo vanes are all gummed up because of my EGR. Or my EGR valve is stuck and now I'm losing boost or whatever problem because of my EGR. Well, yes. But when you pull an EGR off and you have all of that buildup of that nasty gunk, that's not exactly a clear depiction of what's being pushed back into your engine.
No.
EGR actually uses inert gas that has had all the oxygen burnt out of it. Mm-hmm. Is there some particulate in there? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. But reintroducing that inert gas and mixing it with oxygen and diesel fuel helps reduce the NOx of your vehicle. So it's really important.
And cylinder temperatures.
Totally correct. So when we lower cylinder temperatures, we're going to get lower NOx emissions out of the tailpipe. So it's actually a really crucial part of meeting today's emission standards to have your EGR functioning properly. Now, with all technology, and I think this is true across the board for all of the devices and everything in your truck, as years go on, technology improves and we learn more. Yeah. We learn about how to make these things more effective, how to make them more reliable, how to make them last longer. Yeah. We tore off the EGR of Clean Sweep after a full season of sled pull. I think we had 12 pulls, 20,000 miles on the truck just that year. We pulled it off. Our EGR was perfectly clean.
Yeah, I mean, we've had the luxury of pulling off a couple EGRs of service here. We had the trucks in. We figured we would just do it just to do it. And, surprisingly, it wasn't what we had thought, maybe going on Google, typing in failed EGR and finding like an 0.36 liter EGR system that has been through a couple turbos and those turbo oil seals ended up letting go. And that's where it's just I think all of these things as a whole.
And I think that's the thing is I'm having a hard time remembering. I'm sure it's happened, but personally, I don't remember just an EGR failing. I remember a lot of vehicles that had a boost leak and then an EGR failure, a rail pressure issue, then an EGR. Something else mechanically went wrong, and then it's a very sensitive part. Yeah. So then anything that hits it that's wrong can really fuck it up. Is what it comes down to.
You're no longer, running intervals of service, longer than what would be recommended from, the OE, or in my opinion, even sooner than is how I do it. But you have to be very particular with fuel filter changes, oil changes, where you're getting your fuel, how the truck is operating. I mean, any part in the system that's running incorrectly on the fuel and air side could potentially harm the emissions in the emissions system.
Totally true. And I think we see that real heavily in the 6.4s. I think 6.4s get a bad rap, mostly because of some of those other problems. And I'm sorry, we were going down the list here. Selective catalytic reduction, that's an SCR. Mm-hmm. This has to do with your DEF system. So this is the application of DEF. DEF itself is your diesel exhaust fluid, your AdBlue or urea. Yeah.
And that's all one, right? That's all one setup. Yep. And then you have the DOC, which is the diesel oxidation catalyst.
This is what heats your DPF. Yep. So the DOC has certain materials in it that allow it to heat up really, really quickly, so it responds to exhaust gas temperatures. So as we run higher exhaust gas temperatures, whether that's just from the engine operation or from spraying direct fuel injection into the exhaust, the DOC heats up the DPF and burns off all of the soot or particulate matter that's built up in there.
Now, what I like about this, that's the emissions system, right? Those are, to today's standards, these are all of the pieces that make the emissions system.
Their only function, those pieces' only function is to meet emission standards.
Now, yes. what I like about that is now we talk about the parts that have been on these engines for years, okay, which are injectors, okay, CP3s or CP4 pumps, or HP4 pumps, depending on the newer L5P
Sure.
and the turbocharger. But those all have a direct impact on the emissions and how they work together. Turbo technology, injection pump technology, and even injector technology play huge roles.
And that's something that we've gotten a chance to actually ask the OEM about when we've interviewed guys like Rod Romaine, who's the chief engineer at HD Ram trucks, and Nicola Menarini.
Mm-hmm.
We asked them, well, why are you guys changing fuel systems? Why does a 6.7, especially a newer model 6.7, run much higher rail pressure than an 03 does, right? Like when they first got into common rail, well, they've learned about it and they've developed these injectors to run at a higher pressure because
of
we
the
get better
atomization.
Right, exactly. We get better atomization, we get better burn, we get less soot. It's a good thing all the way around. And that's the same that goes for the fuel pump and the turbocharger. Yep. Variable vane turbo technology would most likely not exist without emissions equipment, without emission standards.
Well, and it goes two ways. You look at, you reap a lot of benefits from a variable vane technology, right? Quicker spool, the manipulation of how the turbo comes in and out of boost, exhaust brake featuring, things like that. But the variable vane is used to help work with EGR in how it opens and closes.
Right.
So now there's like 4 functions of what the VGT was even known for, why it was introduced.
And that's why I think some of those like sellable results of variable vane technology, like quicker spool up, wider range of efficient turbocharging, those I feel like were like, I don't know which was the cart or which was the horse.
Right.
I don't know if emissions standards came first and drove variable vane technology, or if drivability and practicality drove it, and then they bypassed it and used it in another form. But it is interesting to see that every time we talk to somebody from the OEMs, they constantly bring up noise, vibration, harshness, so NVH, and then they bring up emissions equipment, and then they bring up customer demand for power.
Yeah.
They're the OEM. They have the technology and the capability of providing you a 600 horsepower truck with a warranty from the factory. They could just build the parts we build in the aftermarket world and give them to you.
Yeah.
But there's all these other things that have to come first for it to be a viable product. I think one of the things that's easy to overlook as we talk about what is emissions equipment and how does emissions equipment work and things like this, why do we have emissions equipment? How did we get here? Right. Like what happened? And I think as we dive into that, the EPA looks like a really bad guy. Yep. They look like the villain in the story. So before I kind of explain how the EPA came to be and why the EPA exists, I just want to talk a little bit about the power the EPA has to impact an industry.
Well, I think, for that, let's paint a picture, right?
Sure.
2007 and a half, right? 2008 come about and DPFs get introduced, right? The 6.4 Power Stroke, right? Introduction that year. 6.7 Cummins.
Yep.
And then the LMM 6.6 liter Duramax.
You got it.
Right? There was not a lot of knowledge. There wasn't a lot of informative things about emissions and this and that. Companies came out, tuners came out, remove it, make more power. Simple as that. It was a new product.
Yeah,
right?
it failed.
New hardware, right?
And it failed. So it was an easy one for customers to have a demand.
So one of the first household products or tuners that I remember seeing on all the websites and online was H&S. Anyone, in my opinion, that has anything to do with diesel, that's been in the diesel game for a few years, has heard of this brand.
Sure.
H&S, Mini Max. I think there was like a Pro XRT. There was a couple options, right? Yeah. But they had a settlement and they got an NOV issued back in May of 2012.
Right. Which I don't think most people realize, because what we remember is 2015 when they signed their agreement and it went public.
Right. So back in 2012, they were served an NOV. Okay. Agreement was signed in December of 2015. And what was the fine, Paul?
Okay, so this is one of the places that I thought the EPA's website, EPA.gov, was a really good resource. You can actually go in and read the actual agreement between H&S and the EPA, and the same is true for every other case study we're going to talk about. In that agreement, there was some very enlightening details. One, I just feel like I remember the fine being very, very high. It was $400,000.
Wow.
Is what was listed in the agreement. Now, things could have changed. There could have been addendums and all sorts of other shit that I didn't follow.
But that doesn't include lawyer fees, battling this out, fighting this. They had to pay $400,000 for the wrongdoing back in 2012 to 2015, essentially from one start to finish.
Correct. And not only that, but also keep in mind, this is after they negotiated, because the way the EPA law is written, or the way the Clean Air Act is written, is that the violation fine is $3,750 per violation.
Wow.
In the agreement, they had listed a few different numbers, but in general, somewhere between 70 and 100,000 violations.
Holy crap.
Between hard parts and tuners, just do the math on that, what that number would be.
Yeah.
Now, also at the time that they signed this agreement, it says in the agreement, H&S no longer sells any tuner products because they involuntarily lost their source. Bully Dog, a division of Derive, a co-conspirator with SCT, they also got fined.
Okay. And
now,
this
when
was
they
all in the same area,
all very, very close to each other. When Derive got fined, they were told, you are not allowed to sell anything that's going to go to anybody with emissions defeat devices.
Wow.
You have to change your software so that people don't even have access to emissions controls because they were just releasing custom tuning software. And you cannot sell to anybody that has anything to do with delete anywhere. Also, Derive got hit with a $300,000 fine as a part of their civil penalty, and they had to agree to spend $6.25 million to implement all sorts of changes to their company. They had to completely rebuild their company. And it actually says in there, like, you can actually read the bullet points. Here's all the things you have to do. It was right down to when will you have to recall the products you've already released.
Wow.
So it's insane. And I found all sorts of guys that got hit with shit like this. There's another guy, Class of America, CLAAS. They got hit. They had a $200,000 fine. They settled back in 2016. I just pulled a list of the EPA settlements in 2016. So that doesn't tell me, like, when did they get their NOV, how much was their civil penalty. But I also found Antrim Diesel Services, Eisenhart, Liberator, Patterson, Precision Automotive, Baltimore Motorsports. I mean, there was a whole list of people just in 2016 that settled. You can go through and see it every single year. You can read all of those and find out, what did these guys get fined. It's not chump change.
No.
You get hit with $200,000, $300,000, $400,000. That's not. If your company's doing $5 or $6 million a year in gross sales, that doesn't automatically imply that you have $5 or $6 million sitting around to pay out fines. That's not how math works.
No, that's not how it works.
Like this, for some of these companies like H&S, this destroyed their company.
Yeah.
Well, that's the severity of what the EPA can do.
Well, and I think, diesel motorsports, right? The industry as a whole is very young.
Yeah.
Right. So everything's coming down, and I mean, the time that I've been in the industry, you've been in the industry, and any of us here, we saw it in the high, and now we're seeing it kind of. I wouldn't say it's a low, but I would say what we're coming to find out is we have regulations just as the gas industry does, and the gas industry went through this a long time ago.
Guess what? The EPA, this is something I think people forget, because people hear what the EPA can do, and then their immediate reaction is to blame the EPA, to make them the villain for doling out these fines and going after these companies. But what you guys don't remember is that the EPA has had this unfettered amount of power for a reason. Here, this is how we got here. This is directly from the EPA's website. For those of you conspiracy nuts who don't believe in the EPA, that's fine. I'm totally okay with that. You believe whatever you want, but this is what they have to say. Congress established much of the basic structure of the Clean Air Act in 1970 and made major revisions in 1977 and 1990. Dense, visible smog in many of the nation's cities and industrial centers helped prompt passage of the 1970 legislation. They then go on to say, to protect public health and welfare nationwide, the Clean Air Act requires EPA to establish national ambient air quality standards for certain common and widespread pollutants based on the latest science. I really put the emphasis on science there. That was me, not the writing. EPA has set air quality standards for 6 common criteria pollutants. They include particulate matter, ground-level ozone, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, carbon monoxide, and lead. Guys, if you talk to people who lived in major metropolitan areas, even I know I'll take a lot of flack for this, somewhere like L.A., the L.A. basin in the 1970s, there's visible smog hanging over the city. Visible, cloudy pollutants hanging over the city. This is something that Mexico City still deals with today.
Yeah.
It's not like that now. It's not like that now. That's what I think a lot of people forget, is that when we talk about the EPA, yes, it fucking sucks when they come out and shut down a company. It is absolutely hurtful when they walk into a small business and they say, you have made these violations. Here's hundreds of thousands of dollars of fines. That's terrible. That is awful. But there is a reason and there is science behind what they're doing. And I think that's what a lot of people forget. This works. We're going in the right path. One of the biggest problems we have is figuring out how to control this on such a mass scale.
Right.
And I will say, as a consumer and somebody who drives a diesel vehicle every day, thank God they're not going after end users. Just yet.
Yeah,
I mean, yet. I don't know. This is something that I think people don't realize, is that you're upset that they find a small business, but man, if they show up at your door and they find you $37.50, how happy are you going to be then?
Right.
How mad are you? Who are you going to be mad at that point?
Now replacing the DPF or the sensors or the EGR is a small change.
Sure.
To a $3,750 fine, and you're probably gonna have to put the truck back to stock, and you're probably gonna have to put more money into it to get it to where it was. Right. Not trying to scare anyone, but this is just logic. This is reality. And what I'm saying is not too far fetched. Any of our Canadian listeners or anyone that has a friend or someone from Canada, especially in the Ontario area, this is something that they do up there.
Sure. I mean, the federal government's not going to show up at your home and say, let me inspect your vehicle. But what your municipal government, your local government may do is say, oh, man, there's a lot of money to be made in fines over there. I wonder if we should set up a set of scales on the road. Who's seen a set of scales on the road? I know I have.
Yeah, me too.
You don't get to fight back about getting scaled.
Or I mean, the simplest way would be to start enforcing diesel emissions testing. Like where we're at in McHenry County. McHenry County has testing, but certain towns within the county is excluded.
Right.
For an example, where I live, I don't have testing.
Yeah.
Right? The next town over, 5 minutes down the street, they have testing.
Exactly.
So it's crazy to me, and I think that's where you're going to start to see the push moving forward is mandatory testing. They're going to start to incorporate a lot of that, and I think that's where some end users are going to not necessarily be happy down the road. Now,
absolutely.
With that spinoff, right? So what's going on today? Okay, right now.
The biggest news out there is what we talked about last week. The EPA settlement agreement with the PPEI, Corey Willis and PPEI, just came out. Everybody just found out he got fined $1.1 million. And he is also starting some sort of emissions testing facility. I don't know if that was a part of his settlement or not.
Yeah,
Derive seemed to have something pretty similar.
It is what it is.
But it's a $1.1 million fine. And it scared a lot of people. It really woke a lot of people up to say, what the fuck, when they went onto their EasyLink and all of a sudden their files weren't there anymore.
Right. So EasyLink, a lot of the support that PPEI has done in the past, last week, Monday, 2 p.m., everything wiped out. So now these guys spent money on an aftermarket exhaust, an aftermarket EGR delete kit. They spent big money on tuning. Maybe they paid a shop to do it. Maybe they did it themselves. The tunes aren't off the truck, guys. The tunes are still in the truck. You can't remove the tune. But what you're not going to get is support moving forward. So if you made a change to the truck and you needed the tune altered, PPEI is not going to offer any support for you.
Done.
Okay? And some of the other tuning companies that have been out in the past that they have been in similar situations, for an example, ATP trucks, when they cut off support, the support was done. They would gladly unlink your unit or whatever. You can go to another tuner that could offer you that potential support. But they were not offering any tuning or modifications off of what they supported prior.
Right.
So now, these guys are scrambling. Now, to back up a little, as much impact as this current news with PPEI has had, I feel like there's a lot of misled information.
Yeah. God, here's my favorite one. Tuning's done.
Yep.
Can't tune your vehicle.
Can't tune your vehicle.
That's not true.
The EPA said so.
Right. That's not what the EPA said.
That's what a lot of people are,
and
understanding.
if you go as far back to Derive, who's as far as I can find, and I may be wrong on this, but as far as I can find, They were the first diesel tuning company to get hit with these EPA fines for defeat devices that still exist.
Wow.
Okay. There could be somebody else prior to this, but they were definitely, I think, the biggest ones to get hit that are still around today. A part of their settlement actually required all tunes going forward. It even says, if you forgive me on the wording, I don't have it printed out in front of me, but it basically said, if you go get an EO number, if you go get CARB approval, your tunes are legal to sell. So it did offer a solution of saying, here's a legal way you could operate your company, because at the end of the day, what your company is a tuning company. Yep. They're not a delete company.
Right.
And there's a big difference there. Tuning, still wildly okay.
Yep.
Totally acceptable. Delete tuning, not. It's just going to be harder. And we're seeing that from the distributors.
Well, and I think you need to look at, too, to the guys that are out there and you're, soul searching, right? You're online, you're on the forums, you're trying to find that underground guy that's offering that type of support. Well, what's going to happen with that guy in a couple of years? What happens with your truck in a couple of years? Do you trust that guy? Does that guy have the R&D and the data to back it up, or did he fine-tune somewhere or a base file that now he wants to be the next upcoming thing? He wants to make a couple bucks.
Right.
Be smart about what you're investing your money into. I don't care if it's a $15,000 LMM truck or if it's a $70,000, L5P. Right. Be smart about what you're doing with your trucks and where you're investing the money. Yes. Emissions. This is what this topic is today.
That's it, man.
The emissions is going to hurt my truck. Guys, we have to stop thinking that way. That is not reality.
That's just not. What you're seeing is anecdotal experience being played up to people's fears, because people don't understand emissions equipment. They've heard a lot of bad things about emissions equipment, and it's easy for a company to play on that fear and get your money out of your wallet. Mm-hmm. What you have to do is you have to stop, take a step back, and do a little research and understand the system.
Well, let's throw a couple scenarios out there. I own an 03 LB7 and my injectors went out. Okay, do you go and delete the injectors? No, you fucking replace them. What are the injector lifespan on an LMM or an L5P or an LML? Like, they got better. They improved. What are you going to do if your 2004 Cummins turbo blew up? Well, you can't blame that on the fucking emissions. There was no emissions on the truck to begin with, right? You can't go and delete the turbocharger.
Sure.
My 2015, the water pump went out last year. I can't go and delete the water pump. It was a moving fucking part, just like everything else is, right? But where I'm getting at is as time has progressed, parts improved, right? So you're not seeing the failures like you did. You don't hear of an EGR failure on a newer truck like you did in 04.
No.
Okay, I don't care.
Yeah.
Are there certain guys out there that might run into a problem? It's mechanical. Things fail. Get over it. Yeah. Okay, but you can't go and just remove these parts and remove this and remove that.
I want to talk about this one, Chris. Free flowing exhaust. I just want to give my truck some free flowing exhaust.
You know what? Hey, I want to say. I remember years ago reading that, the first things you did do an older Cummins, intake exhaust and a tune on a 24 valve. I want to say that the truck was more gutless when I threw a 5-inch exhaust on there. Now, over at Calibrated, working with Nick the years that I had, I remember reading this article years ago, 4-inch exhaust was good for like 500, 600 horsepower. You want more than that, you need a 5-inch exhaust.
Bullshit.
We make over 1,000 horsepower through a 4-inch exhaust with a muffler on our Suburban.
Right.
You put a 5-inch on there, you're not making any more or less power.
You gain nothing but sound.
You gain the sound. So, when you talk about high flow, free flowing exhaust, I will be the first to admit on air, if you were to look inside of a DPF, you're like, man, it's crazy that it's got to be a choking point. It's got to be a choking point. But then we get these trucks on the dyno, truck after truck after truck, making power. They're efficient. They flow.
So when you have a choke point, I always wanted to call this logic out. When you have a choke point, and it's past all of the equipment that makes power, are people suggesting that the back pressure in the exhaust is costing them compression in the engine?
Well, what would end up happening is the engine has to work against expelling the gases out of the tailpipe.
Sure.
Right? I mean, that is a thing.
Here's my thing. Until the back pressure between the DPF and the manifolds was greater than the exhaust pressure coming out of the cylinder, like until your back pressure was greater than the exit pressure of the cylinder, why would it fucking matter?
No, it wouldn't, but people don't think that.
Right. And that's what I'm saying. Is like I don't think people say, they say free flowing exhaust, and I'm like, well, It's a turbocharged engine with high compression. There should not be a back pressure conversation to be had here.
Well, that's if that again,
if I
the
chop
DPF.
if I chop the fucking downpipe off of my turbo that feeds directly into my exhaust, why would I make any more or less power? I'm past all of the parts that make power.
But the way guys are looking at it, and I think what you're missing is the DPF has netting, it has material.
It does, yeah.
Okay, so you can't visibly see through it.
Yep,
right.
Totally
so
agree.
therefore, the theory is it hinders flow. It hinders exhaust flow. So now it's a blockage. That'd be like putting a potato in the tailpipe. If you get like a little 4-cylinder engine, you put a potato in the tailpipe and really lodge it in there, the engine might not even start.
Sure.
Right, because it can't pump, it can't push out because it's an engine pump. It's a
right,
pump,
and
pump.
I understand, and that's what I'm saying is like I understand that concept, right, of what you're saying and what a plugged exhaust would do, but it would have to be completely plugged to cause a problem in a diesel engine.
No, yes. But that's where company, what CPS has been doing for years and proving the model works. Right. These theories of having the delete to make power is bullshit. Right?
It just doesn't back up.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't at all.
And now what's great is now we're starting to see other people agree.
You're starting to see a lot of other shops, big companies in the industry that, maybe they were like low-key supporters, maybe they weren't supporters at all. Now everyone's like, okay, now they're looking at the bigger picture, the diesel industry as a whole, not a small segment of remove emissions.
Yeah.
So
one of the guys I think that we haven't talked about, or groups we haven't talked about, is install shops. We've talked a lot about manufacturers and tuners and large distributors.
I mean, this all trickles down to them.
All people who have gotten NOVs, by the way. Some of the largest distributors out there, some of the smallest distributors, but even the install shops. Let's say you haven't ever gotten visited and actually fined, right? Mm-hmm. But you've been doing deletes for the whole time.
It's not going to happen to me.
Now all of a sudden, your supply is getting short. Yep. It's harder to find these parts. It's harder to get the correct parts.
Well, I mean, it wasn't very long ago. FlowPro had like $500,000 of product stopped at the border. Now, guys, this is $500,000 at distributor cost.
Right.
Distributor cost. That's well over $1 million in products, at minimum $1 million of products stopped at the border, and that was just exhaust systems.
Let me just also call out, that is the EPA telling a foreign-owned company no.
Yeah.
You can't bring this product in.
So now, these guys, listeners, you guys want a FlowPro exhaust, good luck finding them. You might find one like with the incorrect, label on them, and they might say it's a FlowPro or whatever.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of creative solutions
and
out
I mean,
there.
The reality of it is you can't go on the major mail orders right now and go order an EGR Delete, a 5-inch straight pipe exhaust for your 2015 truck. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And now the tuning. You aren't going on these websites, going on these mail orders and buying the tuning to support something like that. Again, that's the EPA's movement. That's the EPA saying, listen, guys, we have this under control, and this is our game.
Yeah, it's done. There's no pushback. I just read somebody trying to blow up Corey on basically blaming him for not fighting the EPA on behalf of all of diesel truck owners out there. And I wanted to reach through Instagram and choke that guy as hard as I could. I honestly, it aggravated me so much to have the audacity to tell somebody else who's a private business owner in the United States of America that they should go out and they should invest their money and they should risk their freedom, because literally we're talking about being pushed to the level of potential criminal action to fight for diesel truck owners. Dude, you bought the truck. Mm-hmm. You're the diesel truck owner. How about this? You figure it out.
Go buy something else.
You go buy your shit. Like, you invent this stuff. You invest your money into fighting the EPA. Do you know how large of industries have fought the EPA? None that won. None that won.
The only thing that I will say, and this is nothing against Corey, but Corey did say he's fighting for the people. Like he did make some.
He
but
did.
No matter what,
I think
the gentleman was out of line, in my opinion.
The gentleman was out of line, and I think Corey did fight this for as long as he could.
I mean, you got to think about this, guys. He's been the one thing I want to touch on right now. This didn't just come about 2 weeks ago.
Right.
Corey's been going through this. PPI's been going through this since like 2014.
Yeah.
2014. And you know what? Maybe not in 2014, 2015, he wasn't too, open about it. But come 2016, 2017, 2018, I mean, he was more vocal about, hey, this is what's going on. We're fighting for our rights. This is what I believe. And I mean, he is passionate about what he does. And he took forth and took action about what he believes.
Yeah.
And you know what? This is the aftermath. He's still in business. He's still in the industry. He's going to push the industry along other companies, beside other companies, to make knowledge in emissions in setups, in what the future of diesel looks like, really positive in my opinion.
Absolutely. And that's something like guys have brought up to us like, oh, Corey's your competitor. Corey's a good guy. He's another guy in the industry. Yeah. We've met Corey. We've talked to Corey. We like Corey. Yeah. And we're glad to see people making it through the other side of an NOV and a set of fines. And like I said, I gave a whole list of all of these shops. Some of these guys are small shops. I know some of these shops. They're great guys. They're great shops. They do awesome work. Hey, man, you get hit by the NOV. You get put down as a small business owner. You got to find your way to work back up. And that's what I love to see, is that there are people in this industry who are going to make it through to the other side and actually see this industry continue to progress forward. Guess what? We're not getting vehicles from the OEM without emissions equipment. Guys, that means emissions equipment is here to stay. It's just a reality. We don't talk politics on this podcast. There's been a little bit on the politics front of what could happen with CARB and EPA, right. and you, if you're a Trump supporter, great. If you're a California CARB supporter, great. I don't give a shit. Please don't message me about it. Just so truly. But what we're seeing is that the manufacturers believe in emissions. Yeah. The manufacturers themselves believe in emissions. They believe in the standard for emissions. They believe in the necessity of emissions. They're not going anywhere. We're going to have emissions. The only way to succeed with this is to figure out how to work with the emissions equipment instead of against it.
And I want to say, guys, right before we wrap this up, is I've made this reference in the past, but to the newer listeners, again, this is a little before my time or when I was old enough to really comprehend. But look back in the gas world. We're 20 years delayed in where the gas world is, in all honesty. And if you were to have told someone, ask your dads, ask, uncles, grandpas, something, to today's standard, would you have seen a 500 horsepower, 600 horsepower? There's 800 horsepower vehicles on the street right now from the factory with factory emissions. So did they ever think that was possible? 100%. The answer is no. Right. And, we're coming to the market now with 400 plus wheel horsepower and, 1,000 feet-pound of torque from the factory emissions. It's something that is just going to be able to be grown on and built off of. And, I know that, to all the late adopters or the people that don't want to accept what is coming, give it a little bit more time. I think a lot of guys are going to swallow their words. They're going to look back on Facebook post memories a couple years from now and be like, oh, fuck. Maybe I wasn't as educated as I thought, or, maybe this is, a little different. Just be a little bit more open-minded. Don't message me bashing me. Don't message Paul bashing Paul. It's the reality. It's the future. It is what it is. Take it or leave it.
Our producer, Justin, he is welcome to some bashing, though. So if you do feel like you want to blame somebody, here in the office, we all blame Justin. Feel free to send in any messages you want blaming Justin. We will start a hashtag blame Justin.
I am a CARB fan, I guess, apparently. Right?
I hate you so much.
I'm just kidding. I'm not.
Jeez.
Guys, I think that's it for today. Next week, we're going to be back. We have some really exciting stuff. We're either going to have a guy with a really, really cool build on, or we're going to be doing a ride-along in a 2020 Duramax with tuning. So the new L5P, we're going to do a side-by-side ride-along.
Or maybe we'll have both.
Yeah, maybe both. We'll see what happens.
Let's see how...
We don't plan for the podcast future. We just exist.
There we go.
We can cut that out at the end, please.
No.
As for today, this has been Chris.
That's staying in.
And this is Paul. Thanks for listening.
You people know a lot about trucks. Bing, bing, bong. Thank you very much.